So we do have like 5 or 10 minutes left. So we'll just go ahead and quickly talk about adult divisions, and maybe we won't get into it in depth, and then save it for next week. But basically, what we got going on in science fiction fantasy. Someone can tell me if I miss one, but we've got kind of what we call epic fantasy, right? We have what I will call heroic. This isn't the only definition. Okay. We have urban. Those are the 3 big divisions of fantasy right now. Am I missing one? I mean, we've got some little sub ones, but that's kind of the big 3.
Where do you put steampunk?
Steampunk would be one of the minor divisions. There's like 5 people publishing steampunk novels, so it's not. I mean, it's cool, but it's not not a major literary division. If anywhere, it probably goes in urban. But all right, in science fiction, we have. I'll go ahead and do it down here, so I don't have to. In science fiction we have military. We have space opera, and we have hard. Those are your basic ones. Over here we'll put dystopian. This is more of a subgenre in YA right now. Hunger Games, Uglies, Maze Runner. Oh no, it's the future and everything sucks. And by the way, the kids have to do everything. That's kind of dystopian right now, the trend. But it's got a grand tradition. 1984 is dystopian. But let's we'll talk about these. Epic fantasy. Epic fantasy is the large cast, world building focused. Yeah, world building focused. That's what that says. Larger than life, meaning worlds at stake. You basically all know what epic fantasy is. I don't have to tell you that, but this is kind of the core of what epic fantasy is. As a new writer, shoot for 120 through 150K words. Okay, that may seem short. Elantris was 250. People were not willing to read Elantris because it was too big. Okay, it was really hard for me to get published. If your book is naturally 250,000 words, right at that length, if you can get it to 150 instead, do it. I promise you, it will be much better for you in the long run. You can get longer later on once you have an established track record. One of the big reasons for this is they can't charge any more for your book at double the length than they can charge for someone else's book. If they've got a book at 120K and a book at 250K, on the shelves, those are both basically, particularly from a new author, going to have the same price. But it's going to cost them way more to produce the big one. So you can see why they're hesitant to take the chances. New readers also are more hesitant to take chances on the bigger books because even though if they like epic fantasy, you're making a big commitment. And that leads to the second thing, suggestion for you writers is write it as a standalone. With sequel potential. Q-U-E-L. Meaning, for your first book, don't try and do what Grandpa Tolkien did, unless you really have to. Don't stop in the middle. Okay, he wrote that as one book and they split it, so it's unfair to him. But you don't want to have a book that just kind of ends. You can do that when you're established, where it's really just part one, but as a newer writer, you want that book to have a smash tie-up ending, which resolves all of your major plot threads, where then you can go on and you could see where it would go more if people wanted to read more. That's going to be really helpful for you in getting published, okay? And in getting readers. So, heroic fantasy is dudes with swords. I say that amusingly. This is the kind of gritty fantasy. It usually has a smaller cast. This
this like Conan?
This is Conan or modern examples, The Blade itself, Joe Abercrombie's books, or R. Scott Baker, David Gemmell. This is still a very viable genre, but Conan is kind of the granddaddy of this. Tolkien is the granddaddy over here, and C.S. Lewis is the granddaddy of the middle grade whimsical fantasy. Conan is the granddaddy here, though you may also say Edgar Rice Burroughs was the granddaddy, because these are Edgar Rice Burroughs' books too.
George R. R. Martin also.
George R. R. Martin is actually a hybrid between these two. Okay? Other people have tried it. No one's really pulled it off like he has. I would definitely call him a hybrid, but I'd actually say he's closer on the epic fantasy scale. He's just borrowing a few of the tropes over here. But yeah. Moorcock. Michael Moorcock is a great heroic fantasy writer. Elric and things like that. These are shorter. You're looking for 80 to 100K. You're looking for a smaller cast. You're looking for lots of action. Even if it's a thoughtful book, like Elric books are, you're generally looking for lots more motion and action, movement. That doesn't necessarily mean every chapter has to be about hacking someone's head off, but every chapter should be moving somewhere. You aren't standing around having political conversations like you are in epic fantasy. Epic fantasy readers will forgive you for that. Heroic fantasy, not so much.
Is this kind of like R.A. Salvatore's like Drizzt book?
R.A. Salvatore is heroic fantasy, definitely. Yeah. All right. There's going to be blending between these, but these are kind of your basic genres. Urban is chicks in leather, kill demons. Okay. Sometimes they don't wear leather, such as Buffy, though she did sometimes. So there's an entire genre of this. The YA version of this is kind of Twilight, but not really. That's its own thing. That's more paranormal romance. Urban fantasy, also called dark urban or paranormal, is basically, Dresden Files. Even though he's not a chick kicking chicks in leather, there's a lot of chicks in leather in this genre. But Dresden Files is a good example of this. This is our world with a dark underworld. This is very popular right now. There's a lot of wide spectrum in what's going on here. You've got things that are a little bit more humorous, like Kitty and the Midnight Hour. Anyone read those? They're very fun books. It's about a woman who runs a radio show. She happens to be a werewolf, and it's for paranormal people to call in and stuff. But they're often mystery-style plots. And they tend to be really fast-paced. We're talking like 70K with thriller pacing, meaning an explosion at the end of every chapter kind of stuff, okay? So that's urban. We had some people who were writing urban, didn't we? Anybody? Nobody's writing urban. Okay. It's not really as much a BYU thing, but, you know, Dresden Files. Anyone read Dresden Files? Dresden Files are kind of fun. They get a little bit too graphic for me, but they're really well written. So, military is what it sounds like. Space Marines. Yeah. If you could read the book and say Space Marines, yeah, that's military science fiction. They can be also very thoughtful books. They tend to revolve around big space battles that are realistic. They tend to skew more realistic. Jack Campbell's written a fantastic series of books like this, and you know these are the books where you'll have these big space battles, and you know they have to like wait like 15 minutes for their torpedoes to hit because they're crossing such massive space, and then they have to wait 15 minutes, you know, or like 5 minutes to find out if they did hit for the life to travel back and stuff like that. Like whatever. It's things like that, but it's lots of cool Space Marines. Honor Harrington. Anyone read Honor Harrington? Oh, you guys haven't read widely in the genres. What are you doing in this class? Go read books. Yes. I haven't read James White. Tell me about James White. What is it? Oh, come on. Honor Harrington is the #1 best-selling military science fiction books in the world right now.
It's sci-fi, but it's based on an intergalactic space station. I mean, hospital space station.
Okay.
House in space.
House in space,
But less drama.
but less drama. It's gonna depend. There's the thing about there's so much bleeding. I don't know where I'm sticking. I'm just trying to give you like the general things. Yeah.
Where would you put Firstborn?
Firstborn is faux military science fiction. It's really space opera masquerading as military SF. One of the things about military SF, to pull it off well, you kind of have to have a military background or a lot of familiarity with the military. A good story about this is Elizabeth Moon was wanting to write military SF, and her books weren't selling until they put "She's an Ex-Marine" on the back of her books, and suddenly they started taking off. That may be the reason, but it may not be the reason. That may just be an apocryphal story, but it's pretty realistic in military SF. Space opera. Adventures in space. The thing is, putting this online now, everyone can like read how terrible my spelling is and stuff. Adventures in space. Space opera is your kind of catch-all. It's not really military because military, what type of gun they're using is really important in military. Okay? In space opera, it's a phaser, and we just shoot it, and people die. Space opera is all of your Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars, your fun space adventures. It's kind of your catch-all. If you're not worried about the hard science fiction, and you're not really worried about what type of gun you're shooting, it's probably space opera. Space opera is a very marketable genre that not a lot of people are writing right now. I don't know. Well, I mean, I can theorize on it. Science fiction tends to sell worse than fantasy, and so a lot of people have jumped to fantasy. The one reason might be I've heard people say that during the 90s, all the really serious science fiction writers all moved to writing hard SF, and a lot of the readers then didn't like the hard SF, and so they jumped to fantasy because there wasn't a lot of space opera, but there still is some. Simon Green writes some. Timothy Zahn, yeah. And you know what you see a lot of right now is kind of this space opera that masquerades, that puts on a serious mask and kind of pretends to be military. Old Man's War is this. He says it's military SF. It's really space opera. And Firstborn, my novella you can read online, it's really space opera masquerading as military SF. It's, Ender's Game is a hard one to define. I don't know if I would put it anywhere specifically in here. What Ender's Game really is Hoosiers in space. He took the underdog sports team story. And then when we were talking about taking plot archetypes, he put it in space, which is brilliant, made a great underdog sports team story in space, and then put around it this framework of this nice twist plot of a military science fiction book. So it's kind of like an underdog sports story nestled in a military SF.
I'm going to hold my question until after you define hard SF.
All right, okay. Hard SF. This is written by people with PhDs. I'm joking, but this is kind of what I'm talking about the archetypes. I'm giving the silly Asimov. Yeah, Isaac Asimov, Arthur Clarke, Ken Stanley, Robertson, Red Mars.
Yeah.
Robinson. A lot of the modern SF writers, I mean, there's still plenty of space opera writers too, and I think it's underexplored, but a lot of them are doing this kind of stuff, hard SF. They sometimes are branching out a little bit more, and there's a big argument of whether social hard SF is really hard SF or not. But you're getting into just the science is important. The science is very important, and it should be accurate, and it's an extrapolation of what happens if this scientific thing happens. Where would we go? Arthur C. Clarke, invented the geosynchronous orbit in his books. And, this is the sort of stuff that hard SF people are doing. Okay? Yeah.
Are there specific word counts for all the sci-fi?
Oh, yeah, I should be putting that up. Usually in almost all this SF, you really should be shooting for this kind of 80 to 100K range for pretty much everything. Okay? anything can go longer if you have a good justification for it. Military, I've rarely seen go longer. Space opera I have, but I think it's a mistake. Every space opera I've read longer than that has been a bad idea, except unless it's something like A Fire Upon the Deep, which is kind of like more a space epic fantasy, or Dune. Hard SF, I don't even know what those people are doing, because sometimes they'll be so thick. I mean, the Red Mars books, they're mind-blowing, but they're so thick. Hard SF is probably the one that can go the longest, but it's more like it has a range of like 60K to like 200K. And it's just basically whatever the story demands. There's not as much of a market force upon that. Okay? So, defining where your book is, the nice thing about this is, mostly this is for considering your audience. Because all of these things get shelved. Oh, dystopian. You know what dystopian is. In adult, it's like Philip K. Dick type stuff. Or it's, 1984. It's still very popular. And then we have like little things like steampunk and cyberpunk and stuff like that. But really, everything gets shelved together. And so understanding what your genre is going to help with who are you writing it for. Are you writing this for my friend Ethan when he reads the books, really wants to know what kind of gun they're shooting, and if you get what type of gun they're shooting wrong, it ruins the book for him. If you're writing military SF, there are a lot of people who read military SF that's really important. Or if you get the way the officer interaction with enlisted men thing wrong, it's gonna ruin the whole book for him. Space opera doesn't care about that. Star Trek, they're like, everybody's an officer. We'll just do that, except for Chief O'Brien. Sorry, Chief. You're like the only enlisted man in all of Starfleet. But there's like no rules about fraternization. He's just called Chief because it's fun. And they wanted to come up with a reason why they could call him Chief. I mean, that sort of stuff does not fly in military SF because it's trying to extrapolate real military people in space. But at the same time, military SF has this undertone of Space Marines, yeah! This like, we're going in with guns blazing, and we may all get cut to pieces, but yeah! And so you've got this kind of weird mix in military SF of be really accurate, kind of have some of these little hard SF things, but only when applying to the specific tropes that you're working on, and have the focus be on the characters going into battle or whatnot. Or if you're Heinlein, going to school. It's a really, Starship Troopers, weird book. Fun book, but weird book. It's not about Starship Troopers, it's about Starship Trooper School. Knowing what these kind of tropes are going to help you target it to your audience. If you're going to be writing, heroic fantasy, and knowing what the trends are in heroic fantasy right now, it's going to be really helpful for you for selling. When you go to that editor and they say, "What's your book's like?" you can say, "Oh, it's kind of Joe Abercrombie-ish." You can read those authors and say it's kind of like this, but it has this cool element of my own. Rather than saying, "Well, I'm going to reinvent the wheel and start explaining from the beginning," and you've already lost them when you could have just said, it's like such and such thing, or it's a heroic fantasy that's got really good sense of grittiness, and it's about 10 people standing on a wall defending against 4,000 million troops or whatever. It's like 300. By the way, David Gemmell made an entire career of writing like books that are like 300 with dark gritty men who have hearts of gold standing on the wall defending against people who are also dark gritty men who have hearts of gold, and they all fight and kill each other. That's it's like every one of his books. They're awesome, but it's like that's how he wrote his books. So knowing these things are going to help you, and this is why I kind of tried to split you up into the divisions I did when I put you in your writing groups.